let's hop once again across the pond. The gentleman behind me is Emmanuel Macron, President Emmanuel Macron, or King Emmanuel Macron, or President of the Rich. There are a few monikers that are associated with Macron at this moment. As you know, that's going on in France right now. The Yellow Vest movement has sparked protests for another week. This has gone on to the 9th week, with 84,000 people dragging their bodies out of some warm environment and throwing it into the streets of France in order to protest what they consider to be, let's say, unfair conditions. The system producing unfair outcomes. Now, this channel has been very clear that I think these guys are doing God's work. And wearing this yellow vest, that is this thing that's mandated by law that they have in their cars in case that they need to be seen, wearing these vests saying we need to be seen. I love this. Macron is trying to put this fire out, meaning any political leader, especially that's going to be in these kind of Western countries, when faced with something like this, where you have protests all throughout the country, nearly 100,000 people throwing themselves outside of the streets to protest the way that you've governed the country, any political leader will want to try to put this fire out. Macron has tried several things. One thing was initially to, okay, well, and by the way, all of this started on the fuel tax, meaning giving tax cuts to the rich while trying to balance the environmental concerns that France is engaged in on the backs of the workers. They were going to up gas to be like $7 a gallon. I mean, for the American audience, to get across how extreme that is. The public reacted to this. Now, kind of like an accretion diss, initially, the people didn't necessarily, may not have known that the amount of people were going to be on their sides on this, but they ended up in going out, realizing that the overwhelming majority of the public of France agreed with their assessment that this is wrong. But not just agreeing with their assessment that this is wrong, also that other aspects of how the system is organized, the things that the system caters to, the things that it doesn't cater to, were wrong, and they needed to be rebalanced. I love this 1,000 times. I love this. But you can imagine Macron doesn't. And after the first thing that didn't work, essentially saying, hey, okay, we'll put a pause on the fuel tax, we'll implement it later. This was, of course, rejected. Macron, at that point, started to throw things overboard. Okay, we'll stop the fuel tax, we'll cut the tax that we were going to put on the pensions, we'll increase the minimum wage. Now, but the catch for this is, he refused to raise taxes back, meaning the tax cuts. He refused to get rid of tax cuts on the rich. The Yellow Vest movement, undeterred, continued to protest. Like I said, going into the 9th week of protests, with an increase in the number of people that are coming out in the Yellow Vest movement itself. The government has started to initiate crackdowns from the standpoint of legalities of saying, you can't protest in these particular areas, but also show of forces by the cops where they are beating, hitting, spraying water cannons, or throwing tear gas at peaceful protesters. The government is trying to find a way to solve this problem. So, politics. Macron has initiated what he's considering to be a national conversation. And the politics of this are somewhat iffy. So let's talk about the politics from two angles. I mean, even though it's France, you have a different starting point, meaning cultural and stuff like that, but ultimately their objectives are going to somewhat play themselves. The Yellow Vest movement needs to find an escalation, meaning you've put your bodies into the streets, you've been able to garner public support, and kind of like an accretion disk where you have gravity pulling all of these particles together. Keep in mind, this movement wasn't political parties. This was regular people just like you and me who stood up and said, this is enough. We're done. Your interests, meaning from the standpoint of government, this edifice that is supposed to be looking out for our interests is not. And there is no political solution to get the government to do that. Meaning the people who we're putting in office either are ineffectual in representing our interests or just are not representing our interests. Their priorities are something that are different than the priorities of us. It needs to change. It needs to change. These were regular people. In fact, they resisted being appropriated by any particular political party. These were regular people doing this. That needs to be understood. That's a mind-blowing thing. But from their standpoint, what's the escalation? You've gotten political sessions. Great. You've been able to get the government to give certain things that you've wanted. And again, great. But your main concession, or the upping the ante from the standpoint of the concessions, is that the Macron government collapses. Or, if not the Macron government collapses, that there's also more agency from the standpoint of what the public wants, either through these idea of referendums, this kind of almost direct democracy. So it's like, what's the ante? What's the next thing that you do to put additional pressure on the government itself? Or does this just meld out into protest after protest after protest? And how long can you keep that energy up? I agree that you can keep a fire going for a particular while, but after a while, people start to burn down. You have to get your political concessions when you can get those political concessions. Not necessarily you bail out, but what's the next step in order to keep this going, meaning for this to transform? At some point, it's going to reach its pinnacle. At that point, what does it transform into for you to get the political concessions that you want? Not necessarily a tax cut here, a tax cut there, but a fundamental change in the way that France is organized, systemically. From the standpoint of the Macron government, Macron is writing a 2,300-word letter that he's sending out to France, essentially putting in the newspapers. I'm going to read parts of this 2,300-word letter, but this is his way of sparking a national dialogue. Apparently, there are going to be debates that are going on in town centers and all this other stuff all throughout France. The fact of the matter is, we have no idea how this is going to be implemented. And if you're talking about town halls, you've had, 84,000 or 80,000 cops all throughout France to push back. Is it possible that you can't find a certain number of people to go to these town halls to push the discussion in a particular direction, or to try to control the dialogue? I am very cynical about this type of stuff, and I don't particularly trust Macron or the government's motives in this, seeing as all incentives in the world is for them to try to undermine and take the wind out of this movement. Also, Macron is going to come out and make a decision on what people are telling him in March, which means that there's a gap with the goal of taking the wind out of the sails of these protests that are going on week after week after week. In this letter, Macron asks certain questions. People are giving him demands, and after he gets the demands, he's starting asking questions. But the goal of the government is to seem sensible and rational, that I am Macron, and I am listening to you. After all, even though you're calling me king of the rich, I am here, and I am listening to you. I am not out of touch, and hence I am writing a letter to you, because it could have been worse. It could have been in a tweet. But I am writing a letter to you, and we're going to have a national dialogue and talk about it. But again, the goal of this is to, A, to appear completely rational, and to appear as if he's listening, to try to up his poll numbers and to decrease the support to Yellow Vest, because right now they're at 67% and he's at like 30%. So this is the government's goal. We're listening, we're here, we're not out of touch, we're trying to open a national dialogue, we're trying to talk, we're trying to be rational and sensible. Whether that works or not is sketchy. It depends on whether or not he can shake the public perception that he is indeed president of the rich. Keep in mind, the support of the Yellow Vest movement is at 67%. So the protests themselves, the public itself in France, has a certain perspective of the government and a certain perspective of Macron. And the idea of breaking an already public perception is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to do, but Macron is trying. There's something else I want to add here before ending this, and I'm going to put the articles at the bottom. It's something that he says in this, and I think it's Rousseau who talked about social contract, but I want to talk about part of that. So, in the letter, Macron said he was open to ideas and suggestions, but insisted the government would not go back on previous reforms or key measures in the 2017 election campaign. I have a question, Macron. What if the very notion of the people out there protesting was, in fact, because of what you were passing from a standpoint of reforms. Meaning their protests and the reason and the aims to which they are pushing for are not separate and distinct from the reforms that you've implemented. Meaning that making that point that you're not going back over the reforms kind of makes the entire point of this letter null and void. Ultimately, if you're not going back on the reforms, and those quote-unquote reforms are the reasons, in part, that those people are out there protesting, then you're still at the same standoff that you were at prior. It is very possible that those reforms are, in fact, part and parcel to, or at the very least, intrinsically linked to why those people are out there protesting. If you're going to put that line in, then you might as well scrub the letter. It becomes somewhat of a moot point. No questions are banned, Macron writes. We won't agree on everything. That's normal. That's democracy. But at least we'll show that we are people who are not afraid to speak and exchange views and debate. Their issue is not the debate. Their issue is they feel isolated and alienated from a society that seems to be focused, or a ruling elite of a society that seems to be focused predominantly on the welfare of the rich. That's their point. That's their point. The letter, to be published in French newspapers on Monday, marks the start of a nationwide consultation in which citizens are invited to give their views on 4 central themes: taxation, the organization of state, its public administration, ecological transition, and citizenship and democracy. My issue with this is the questions and the organization of this can be constrained in a way that tries to get a certain answer. But again, we have to see how it's administered and how he goes about doing this, and the end outcome, because the whole point is the end result. The idea of pushing this out to March, again, is a way to dilute the energy that's behind in the movement. It's delay and diffuse. People tend to not be able to keep up fire over the course of a long period of time. If you can delay it and diffuse it, particularly if it can't transform into something else that can allow its energy to be, let's say, transmutated into some way to get concessions, real, long-lasting concessions. If the main concession is that this government collapses, then you need to find a way to escalate in order to push it to do so. But I would be very skeptical with engaging in this. Just saying. Yes, you have to engage. You don't have a choice. But I would be very clear, let's say it that way, in what Macron is trying to accomplish versus your own goals, and making sure that those goals can be accommodated within this context. Because it's possible that this could be constructed in a way that comes out with a very specific answer. Macron is trying to take the fire out of this. So be aware, political strategy is at work. Macron said the proposal collected during the debate will build a new contract for the nation. I love the contract for the nation concept of that, but what I think about this and what he thinks about this may be different. Influence political policy making and establish France's stance on the national, European, and economic international issues. This is how I intend with you to transform anger into solutions, he wrote. Accepting that everyone wanted taxes were fairer and more efficient, he warned against unrealistic expectations, adding that there could be no drop in taxation without cuts in public spending. Hey, what about an increase in taxes? I mean, you gave a massive tax cut when you first got in office. What about getting rid of those? But again, the original, before anything else was said, none of the reforms that were implemented he's going back on, meaning, no, I'm not repealing those tax cuts. You have to work from this particular perspective. He's giving you a framework to which to work. I'm saying the problem is the framework in and of itself. In the letter, Macron wrote that they would accept no form of violence, including pressure and insults against elected representatives, media, journalists, state institutions, or public servants. If everyone is being aggressive to everyone, society falls apart. My last point in this, the idea of society falling apart. There is a social contract that each of us, to some degree, accept being in a society, at least in the way that we function in our society. That social contract works with ideas of iconography, meaning all of us feel like we're pulling in this kind of shared heritage, or all of us are part of a shared heritage. But beyond the shared heritage thing, if you feel that you are part of a system or a society where the ruling elite of that is functioning in a way that is not in your best interest, then the notion of the social contract breaks down. It's not that the people are being aggressive for the sake of being aggressive. They're being aggressive because they feel they've been alienated from the society itself. Not to mention the cops are beating the shit out of them. But more apropos, they're being that way because of the way the society was, not the other way around. I hope that point makes sense. Like, it's the aggression that these guys are putting out. It's not aggression in and of itself. They were part of a social system. That social system started to cater to one aspect of the society itself while still allowing those people to still pay taxes and everything else into the society. They feel alienated from a system to which they believe is functioning at the behest of the ruling elite and the rich. That's their issue. Now, in the saying that they want the society, the government and all this other stuff, part of the reason that they want this government to collapse is because this government was trying to balance issues of climate change on their backs while giving tax cuts to the top 1%. I mean, it's fucking amazing. They don't trust you, dude. And in not trusting you, they're looking for something else. But Macron has instituted the political strategy of delay and diffuse, and is trying to, let's say, mitigate what, is a threat to his presidency. So I'm going to end this here because this one has gone long. J. Scott. The real left can criticize Beto or Macron. Don't dare criticize Tulsi. She's an progressive hero. Fuck the gays. What? The real left, J. Scott, the real left can criticize Beto or Macron. Don't dare criticize Tulsi. She is our progressive hero. Fuck the gays. I don't understand where people are getting this homophobic thing from. I honestly, I don't get that one. I've heard people I've heard people say that, but I don't get that. Skip, you say that yet you do not watch the documentary Conspiracy or Silence. Yeah, I don't get this Tulsi thing. I don't get this Tulsi thing. But okay, but fair enough. You guys are attacking Tulsi for some reason, calling her homophobic. I don't get where it comes from. I saw people saying something about that, but I've never heard her say anything that has been either remotely homophobic. In fact, I probably should do a video on it. Bird Box Jamarl. I've seen it. What? Bird Box. What is Bird Box? Bird Box. I'll look up Bird Box. I don't know what Bird Box is. Yeah, I've heard rumors. I've heard these vague rumors, but I haven't seen anything. Alright, I'm going to end this here. And by the way, Tulsi Gabbard is fair game. Anybody, including Sanders. I've done videos where I've gone after Sanders remorselessly. They're all fair game. How they line up or not line up to a value set. Those things are relative to one another, meaning, of course you can criticize people on various things because you're not going to agree with everybody on everything. Like, it just is what it is. You can go after Tulsi. I mean, come on. Yeah, Bird Box is a Netflix series. I thought he was talking about something else. They're speaking of statements attributed to her in the past. I see. I'll look it up. I'll see what they're saying. I am extraordinarily skeptical, though. I'm extraordinarily skeptical. Everyone has made stupid years ago. Yeah, statements years ago. 2015 is pretty recent. I agree with everyone on everything except me. I know, right, Andrew? Alright, I'll end this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all.